We are joined by Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from Bristol, and also Mr. Robert Fantina, author and journalist from Kitchener, Ontario. Gentlemen, nice to see you again. Mr. Gosling, beginning with you, your initial thoughts on the recent assassinations and what could we expect from Hezbollah in response? Said Hassan Nasrallah said that a response is definite and inevitable. And why is a harsh response needed, as said by Iran's leader, Ayatollah Khamenei?
Well, look, I would say not necessarily a harsh response, but an intelligent response. And an intelligent response might not necessarily be a military one. And so it may, there are all sorts of tools in the toolbox in order to get back some sort of sense of dignity after these appalling attacks. Now, I think it's pretty clear to everybody in the region that nobody can negotiate with the Israelis, that they don't want to negotiate. There's a no clearer signal than killing the top negotiator of Hamas, as happened yesterday, the day before yesterday. This sort of thing is guaranteed to stop any negotiations. And so I think we need to try and get into the heads of the Israeli leadership. Now, they're having trouble with their own population as well as the surrounding region. And I think, in a way, a peaceful, non-military response is a very good way to drive them and isolate them, the far-right Greater Israel bloc, now leading Israel, really sandwiching them between hostile nations around, not against the Israeli people, but against this leadership and their own population. I think this is probably a wise response, because if you look at the sort of tactics that have been employed by Netanyahu really since the middle of last year, but to a lesser extent in many previous years, they are following the techniques of the Mossad, the famous Israeli intelligence service, which its motto is, "By way of deception shall you do war." So they're lying. And a famous British comedian who everybody pretty much in Britain knows very well, a guy called Alexei Sayle, he did his message at the beginning of this year saying, and he's Jewish himself, and he says they lie and they lie, and in fact he carries on, I won't do it now, for nearly 2 minutes, explaining just again and again, they lie, they lie, they lie, they lie, and that's what they're doing. They believe that they can meld the public mind, and maybe that's true to a certain extent in Israel, but I think less so the rest of the world, whichever way they want. So they can change reality through the use of the media, the press, television, etc., and through lies and intimidation, because of course they are very good at killing journalists. So we've seen one of the estimates I saw recently is 185 journalists that they've killed in Gaza, in the Gaza conflict, in and around this conflict. This is a way that they're trying desperately to control the narrative. This is, I'm afraid, they're on a hiding to nothing. Do you know who also tried to control the narrative? Adolf Hitler in the 1940s, and even earlier than that, obviously, but certainly in the 1940s, he was doing everything he could to fill the airwaves and the newspapers in Germany and the occupied countries in Europe with propaganda. The fact of the matter is, it's got a very short shelf life, propaganda. And I think Netanyahu is going to find that his chicken's coming home to roost very soon. But do understand that these acts are provocations. They are designed to try to elicit a military response, where maybe a more intelligent response might not be a military one. I'm not going to suggest any right now, obviously, but I'm sure the people in Lebanon, Syria, surrounding countries, including Iran, have got the imagination to come up with things that don't directly respond to this provocation in the way that the military, both in the United States and in Israel, want them to.
That's right, Mr. Gosling. Mr. Fantina, your thoughts as well on what Mr. Gosling says, an intelligence response is needed, and why does the regime resort to these types of assassinations, which many are calling a cowardly act? And isn't it against international law? And if yes, why is it allowed? And what's the role of the UN here?
Well, the role of the UN is to control these things and stop them. But the UN is completely ineffective when it comes to Israel, mainly because of the United States. Now, as Mr. Gosling said, these recent attacks, are provocative. These are not things that are going to lead to peace. Now, Israeli spokespeople always say they just want peace and security, peace with their neighbors and security with their for their people. Yet all of their actions contradict those statements. The genocide in Gaza, the assassination of these two political leaders, one in Lebanon, and the chief negotiator was killed in Iran. Mr. Hanaya, these are not things that will lead to peace. These are not things that will lead to a ceasefire. When, again, as Mr. Gosling mentioned, you can't have negotiations when one side assassinates the chief negotiator from the other side. The position of Palestine has always been reasonable. It is Israel that, throughout negotiations, has established new requirements that kept moving the goalposts, basically, making it more and more difficult to reach an agreement. The Israeli government doesn't care about the security of its people, peace in the region, or the hostages that they claim to want to free so badly. They only care about maintaining their power, expanding the area of the Zionist regime, annexing the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and annihilating the Palestinians. The United Nations and the world community is allowing this to happen. Now, when Iran responded militarily back in April, there was a lot of support for Israel at that time. However, in this situation is different. Israel has murdered the chief negotiator, so the international sympathy isn't going to be there. It shouldn't have been there before because Iran was simply retaliating against another assassination. But this time, they, having assassinated the chief negotiator, is going to look differently to the world. It's going to be obvious that Israel is not interested in peace, Israel is not interested in negotiation, Israel is not interested in a ceasefire. So we'll see how this plays out. The idea of a more intelligent or a non-military response is very interesting and very intriguing, and we'll have to see how that plays out.
That's right. Mr. Gosling, why has the UN, in your opinion, why has the UN been so incompetent so far from October the 7th till now? All we've seen is just mere condemnations against Israel's crimes, which have been proven on many occasions. I'll give you a scenario. What would happen if, let's say, Hezbollah kills Macron in Paris, or Iran takes out Donald Trump while he's on a trip in London? All hell would break loose, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the problem was, I think, at the beginning of the Gaza massacre, at the United Nations Security Council, what we had was a relentless attempt by the other nations, except the United States, to get a ceasefire motion passed at the UN. And of course, the US kept vetoing it and vetoing it and vetoing it time and time again. But you know what? After a few months, they were worn down and they had to agree to one of these ceasefire motions. Now, these are quite important because, of course, it lends a legal aspect to the war that the Israelis are pursuing, the massacre they're pursuing, and it has ramifications in the International Court of Justice, etc. So I think that the big problem at the moment with the UN Security Council is the lack of activity and the lack of muscle being flexed by the Chinese. Obviously they're permanent members of the Security Council, and they have also got a veto, but they could be proposing a lot more proactive UN actions in the Gaza Strip, particularly to isolate the Israeli Defense Forces and the Gazan people. But I think we should be seeing much more of that sort of thing from the Chinese. But I think it would be really useful if people could read up. I mean, I'm not saying right now go and buy a book and read it, but there are one or two really good books on all this that's going on now, which have really things I've read in the past, which I'm now thinking, crikey, this was right. And one particular book is this book, By Way of Deception, by Viktor Ostrovsky, the former Mossad officer. Now, when he had his second edition of that book printed, every edition was bought by the CIA and pulped because they didn't want the American public to read it. But it's a terrific book, and it explains some of the deviousness and the perversions going on within the Mossad, the Israeli secret services, and also their real cynical attitude to identifying leaders in various countries and trying to basically become their friends. So you end up with people saying, well, I thought they were my friend. And these are leaders in foreign countries that then find that they've been compromised by somebody they thought was just a friend or an acquaintance, maybe through business, maybe personal relationships, but that they realized eventually was actually working for the Israeli state. And the various techniques that are used, such as there are electronic devices and things, right, even in the 1990s that they use. So to understand just how devious they are, I think is important. And also to look at Netanyahu, who's from the special forces, of course. He's getting on a bit now. When he was a young man, he was doing all these illegal acts with the off the books, so in other words, not under scrutiny of parliament, soldiers from the Israelis, so to do the things that would then be hopefully deniable, black operations. And that's the sort of guy he is. And he wrote this book, Terrorism, How the West Can Win. And in a nutshell, what he's saying is, what we can do is we can create terrorist groups like ISIS and things like that. Of course, they weren't around in 1987 when he wrote the book, but his project was to create these proxy terror groups in order to act like a kind of international mafia, turn up in people's countries and destabilize them. So this really underlines the importance of this guy being put in jail as a war criminal and really as a member of the international organized crime. Then I think we can start to see some sort of well, what's desperately needed in Israel is a country or a state that the surrounding nations can start to negotiate with, because everybody doesn't want peace. There are a lot of people now that want war, are intending to make money from war, and much of the Western world is trying to do that because it's such a failure in its economy that it's now looking for a way out of a failed economy as the Chinese and the Russians start to grow their economies and the Western economies collapse.
Sorry, Mr. Gosling, we only have 2 minutes left. If you can, Mr. Fantini, to wrap this up. The role and complicity of the U.S. Could we say that Israel wouldn't dare commit all these crimes if it weren't for Washington's green light and also ironclad support?
That is absolutely a true statement. It is the United States that supplies Israel with the military and the diplomatic cover that it needs to commit its crimes against humanity, and its war crimes, its violations of international law, and its shocking and appalling violations of human rights. We saw when Iran did attack Israel back in April that the United States and other countries had to come to Israel's aid because Israel wasn't capable of protecting itself. It isn't capable of protecting itself. It relies on the U.S. especially, and any other countries that the U.S. can strong arm into supporting Israel. So Israel as itself, if it were to stand alone, would be unable to do so, and that's what needs to happen. The United Nations has been ineffective because the Security Council has the veto. The 5 permanent members have veto power. The United States uses its veto power to protect Israel all the time. The United States, since this horrendous genocide has begun, the United States has sent hundreds of millions of dollars of weaponry to Israel. Israel has dropped something like 20 times more bombs on Gaza in 100 days than the United States did at Iraq during the whole duration of that war. That's right. It's because the United States provides these bombs that's why these innocent Palestinians are dying in huge numbers. So it is absolutely accurate to say that without U.S. support, Israel would not be able to be committing genocide and its continual and decades-long crimes against humanity.
On that note, I would like to thank Mr. Robert Fantini, author and journalist from Kitchener, Ontario, and also Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from Bristol. Gentlemen, thank you. It was nice talking to you again. And that's it for this news review section. Thank you for being with us.